All right, I've got you. Below is our Section 1 only, fully rewritten, NASA's completely originals, natural human, no reused phrasing, no headings, and built to hook hard while staying grounded and immersive. This is designed to feel like the ES opening movement of a powerful YouTube narration, slow burn, magnetic, and unsettling in the best way. Approx. FP 100 words, no headings, no callbacks to the original wording. New metaphors, new flow, new psychology. There's a strange moment that happens when you realize the world has been watching you longer than you thought. Not loudly, not openly, quietly. The kind of watching people do when they don't want to be seen noticing. And if you're honest with yourself, you've felt it already. That subtle pressure in the air, that sense that something about you registers even when you say nothing. You didn't imagine that. You didn't grow paranoid. You didn't suddenly become too much. What changed is simpler and heavier than that. You crossed a line most people never do. You became noticeable without trying to be. Some people chase attention. They post more, talk louder, perform harder, and still nothing sticks. Others do the opposite. They pull back. They quiet down. They mind their own business. And somehow that's when the attention multiplies. That's when eyes linger. That's when conversations stop when they enter a room. That's when people who claimed they were done suddenly know details they were never told. If that sounds familiar, this isn't about coincidence. It's about presence. There's a type of energy that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need validation. It doesn't beg for approval. It just exists, and that's what unsettles people. Because when someone grows without permission, without applause, without needing witnesses, it forces everyone else to confront their own stagnation. You became a silent reference point. A comparison nobody agreed to make but can't stop making. Think about how fire works in the dark. It doesn't chase moths. It doesn't call them over. It just burns. And yet they show up anyway. Drawn, distracted, unable to ignore it even when it threatens them. That's what happens when someone carries inner momentum. Not hype, not ego. Momentum. The kind that keeps moving forward whether anyone is clapping or not. Here's the part people rarely say out loud. Most observers aren't watching because they admire you. And they're not watching because they hate you either. They're watching because you disrupted something internal. You made them question timing. You made them question decisions. You made them wonder if they misjudged you, mishandled you, or underestimated what you were becoming. And once that doubt enters the mind, curiosity turns sharp. Attention becomes fixation. You might think, but I haven't done anything. Exactly. That's the point. When someone reacts to you without you provoking them, that reaction isn't about behavior. It's about impact. Your stillness started speaking. Your boundaries started sending messages. Your absence carried more weight than your presence ever did. And people noticed the shift before they could explain it. Pay attention to patterns, not words. People who truly don't care don't keep track. They don't remember timelines. They don't reference things you never told them. They don't ask indirect questions through mutual connections. They don't suddenly resurface when your life levels up internally, not externally, internally. But the watchers do. Quietly, methodically, sometimes nervously. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. The closest observers are rarely strangers. They're usually familiar faces. People who had access to an earlier version of you. People who think they understand you because they knew you before the shift, before the detachment, before you stopped explaining yourself, before you stopped shrinking to keep things smooth. When you changed without asking them to change with you, something broke in their mental image of you. That's when watching becomes studying. Studying patterns, studying reactions, studying silence, trying to predict your next move, not because they want to follow it, but because they want to feel prepared for it. Because unpredictability threatens people who rely on control. And the moment you stopped being readable, you became unsettling. There's also a truth most people miss. You don't get watched when you're struggling. You get watched when you're stabilizing. When you're calm under pressure. When you stop oversharing. When you stop chasing closure. When your energy feels anchored instead of reactive. That's when curiosity spikes. Because calm confidence unsettles people who survive on chaos. You may have noticed strange things lately. Certain people acting distant but informed. Compliments that feel rehearsed. Silence that feels heavier than conflict ever did. Eye contact that breaks too fast. Conversations that feel like they're skirting around something unspoken. These aren't random social quirks. They're micro leaks, pressure escaping where it can. When someone feels outgrown, they don't always lash out. Sometimes they retreat and observe. Sometimes they gather opinions. Sometimes they bring your name into rooms you've never entered just to see what happens. Not to gossip, but to measure reactions. To confirm whether what they're sensing is real. To check if others feel it too. And here's what usually shocks them. The reactions aren't dismissive. They're thoughtful, curious, respectful, sometimes impressed in a way that makes the observer deeply uncomfortable. Because they expected doubt. They expected criticism. They expected someone else to minimize you, so they wouldn't have to face the truth alone. Instead, they're met with confirmation. That's when things shift internally for them. Because now it's not just a private feeling. It's echoed, validated, reflected back from outside sources. And that reflection forces a reckoning. People don't struggle with losing others as much as they struggle with losing access. Access to your time, your attention, your emotional availability, your former softness. When you evolve quietly, the loss feels bigger because there was no fight, no argument, no dramatic ending, just distance, growth, silence. And silence leaves too much room to think. You might feel a strange pull lately, like something unresolved is circling you without approaching. Like tension exists without a clear source. That's because awareness has shifted on the other side. They're realizing you're no longer reachable in the same way. And instead of confronting that directly, they're hovering around the edges of your life, watching how you move now. This is where intuition comes in. You don't need proof to feel being observed. Energy announces itself before behavior does. You feel it as heaviness, as a sudden thought of someone you haven't engaged with in months, as an unexplainable awareness that someone knows more than they should. That's not imagination. That's perception catching up to reality. Here's the grounding truth. Being watched doesn't mean you're in danger. It doesn't mean you're being targeted. It means you've become relevant in a way that doesn't rely on proximity anymore. Your growth rippled outward, and ripples always reach unexpected shores. What matters now isn't who's watching, It's how you respond internally. Because the moment you start performing for observers, you hand them power. The moment you stay steady, they're forced to confront themselves instead. You were never meant to shrink back into familiarity. You were never meant to stay digestible. The discomfort you trigger isn't a flaw, it's a signal. And the universe doesn't spotlight people who aren't carrying something real. You don't need to expose anyone. You don't need to confront anyone. The watching itself is already the confession. And as this continues, clarity will come, not through chaos, but through quiet reveals, subtle slips, and undeniable shifts in behavior. This is just the beginning of the unfolding. And if you're still here, still listening, still feeling that internal recognition settle into your chest, that's not accidental either. Got it. Here is as our section 27 is completely original, natural, no reused phrasing, no headings, and built to deepen the tension introduced in section 1. This section shifts from awareness into there is in psychological pressure, hidden motives, and the cracks starting to show, perfect for mid-video retention. Approx. 1,600 words aren't. At some point, watching stops being passive, it turns active. That's when things start to feel strange. Not dramatic, not explosive, just off. The energy changes. The air gets heavier around certain names, certain faces, certain spaces. And even if no one says anything directly, you start sensing that something beneath the surface is moving. That's because observation always creates pressure. And pressure never stays hidden forever. People like to believe they can look without consequence, that they can monitor, analyze, track, and compare without it affecting them. But that's not how it works. When someone watches you closely, especially when they don't want to admit it, they start carrying you with them. In their thoughts, in their reactions, in their emotional landscape, and carrying something heavier than you're prepared for eventually shows. You might notice it first in their behavior. Small inconsistencies, a delay in response that feels intentional, enthusiasm that suddenly drops when you speak about growth, peace, or forward movement. A weird tension when your name enters a conversation. These aren't accidents. These are signs of internal conflict. Because watching someone evolve while staying in the same place creates friction. And friction creates stress. What most people don't realize is that observers often believe they're in control. They think watching gives them leverage, insight, preparation. But the opposite is true. The more they watch without engaging honestly, the more detached they become from reality. They build versions of you in their head, stories, assumptions, projections, and those versions start clashing with who you actually are becoming. That clash is destabilizing. Here's where it gets real. The ones who feel the most pressure are the ones who once felt secure around you. Secure in their influence. Secure in their role. Secure in how predictable you were to them. When you change, their internal map stops working. And instead of updating the map, they panic. They study harder. They zoom in. They replay moments. They overinterpret silence. Because uncertainty feels dangerous to people who rely on familiarity for safety. There's a specific kind of stress that comes from realizing you can no longer read someone. You don't know how they'd feel. You don't know what they think of you. You don't know where you stand anymore. And when that someone used to be emotionally accessible, forgiving, or easy to reach, the loss hits deeper. Not because of love necessarily, but because of loss of access. That's when the watching becomes obsessive. Checking timelines, remembering dates, connecting dots that may or may not exist, asking indirect questions through others, trying to gather fragments of information to regain a sense of control. But control never comes back that way. It only tightens the pressure. You may feel this as a strange sense of being talked about without hearing the words. Like conversations stop just before you arrive. Like reactions don't match the surface level interaction. Like people are responding to something unsaid. That's because they are. They're responding to the version of you they've been building in their mind. And that version carries weight. Another thing happens during this phase. Masks start slipping, not dramatically, subtly. A tone change here, an awkward pause there, a forced smile that doesn't reach the eyes. Compliments that feel hollow or strangely timed. People under pressure struggle to maintain consistency. And inconsistency is the first visible crack. What's important to understand is that this isn't about enemies plotting. That's too simple. This is about internal collapse. When someone realizes they underestimated you, mishandled you, or failed to see your depth, the regret doesn't always show up as apology. Sometimes it shows up as distance. Sometimes as defensiveness. Sometimes as overcompensation. Sometimes as silence so loud it becomes uncomfortable. You may also notice that certain people become hyper, aware of your mood. They watch your reactions closely. They read into your pauses. They interpret your calm as judgment. That's projection. When someone feels guilt or insecurity, they assume others see it too. Even when you've said nothing. There's also a strange paradox at play. The more grounded you become, the more unsettled others feel. Because grounding removes volatility. It removes the drama they were used to navigating. It removes the emotional hooks. And without those hooks, they don't know how to engage with you anymore. So they watch instead, from a distance, trying to figure out where they fit now, if they fit at all. This is often when people start bringing you up in conversations that have nothing to do with you. Not to criticize, not to praise openly, but to test reactions, to see how others respond, to gauge whether the shift they're feeling is real. And when those reactions come back neutral, curious, or respectful, something inside them tightens. Because now the narrative they told themselves doesn't hold. They thought you'd plateau. They thought you'd need them. They thought you'd circle back. They thought time would soften you back into the version they were comfortable with. Instead, you stabilized. And stability is intimidating to people who rely on emotional turbulence to feel important. Here's another layer. When people watch you in silence, they're also watching themselves through you, measuring their progress against yours, comparing timelines, questioning decisions they once defended, wondering what would have happened if they'd acted differently. And those questions don't stay intellectual. They become emotional, heavy, persistent. That's why the pressure feels close sometimes, not because they're doing anything overt, but because unresolved emotion creates energetic noise. And sensitive, self-aware people pick up on that noise even when no words are exchanged. You might feel sudden fatigue after interacting with certain individuals, or an urge to pull back without knowing why. That's your system responding to incongruence, to the mismatch between what's being presented and what's actually happening beneath the surface. You're not wrong for noticing it. You're noticing because you're no longer numbing yourself to discomfort. What's happening now is a sorting, not externally, internally. The universe has a way of applying pressure until truth surfaces. And truth doesn't always come as confession. Sometimes it comes as withdrawal. Sometimes as awkwardness. Sometimes as an unspoken ending. The reveal doesn't need drama to be real. One thing to remember, people under internal pressure often become hyper, focused on the person triggering it. Not because that person is doing anything wrong, but because they represent change. And change forces reckoning. You didn't ask to be that mirror, but you became one by growing. The irony is that while they're busy watching you, you're no longer watching them. You've shifted your attention inward, forward. And that imbalance creates even more tension. Because attention is currency, and when it's no longer being exchanged evenly, those who lost it feel the deficit. This is also why sudden attempts at casual reconnection can happen. Random check-ins, neutral messages, surface-level interactions that feel oddly timed. They're not about connection. They're about reassurance, about checking whether access still exists, and when your response doesn't carry the same energy as before, the message lands. Silence, when it comes from a place of peace, is louder than confrontation ever was. It removes the game, and without the game, observers are left alone with their thoughts. That's when pressure peaks. You don't need to do anything differently. You don't need to protect yourself aggressively. Awareness is enough. Staying grounded is enough. Let people reveal themselves through consistency, or lack of it. Let the watching exhaust itself. Because it always does. Pressure either turns into honesty or distance, and both bring clarity. And what's becoming clear now is this: the more you settle into who you are, the less room there is for misunderstanding. The less room there is for projection. The less room there is for people to linger in ambiguity. Something is shifting, not loudly, but decisively. And in the next phase, what's been hidden won't stay hidden, not because you demand answers, but because pressure has a way of forcing truth into the open, whether anyone's ready or not. Absolutely. Here is Section 3's fully original, natural, no reused phrasing, no headings, and designed to move the story from pressure into exposure, slips, and the beginning of truth leaking out. This is where the masks start failing, and the watcher can no longer stay invisible. Approx. 1,500 words these. There comes a moment when pressure stops being internal and starts leaking into the outside world, not all at once. Not as some dramatic confession, but through tiny fractures that no one plans for. People think they can carry tension indefinitely, but they can't. Something always slips, a word said too quickly, a reaction that doesn't match the situation, a look that lingers a second too long. This is the phase where truth begins to show itself, not because anyone chose honesty, but because the body can't keep lying forever. You may start noticing that certain people behave differently around you now. They hesitate before speaking. They monitor their tone. They seem overly aware of how they're being perceived. That's not politeness. That's self-consciousness. It's what happens when someone knows they're no longer neutral in your story. They've crossed a line internally, even if you never saw it happen. Here's something most people miss. When someone watches you quietly for too long, they start to build emotional attachment without interaction. That attachment isn't healthy or stable. It's fueled by imagination, projection, and unresolved feeling. And the longer it goes unaddressed, the more volatile it becomes. That's why the exposure phase often feels erratic. One day they're distant, the next overly friendly, one moment calm, the next reactive. The inconsistency isn't about you. It's about internal overload. This is where masks start to crack in visible ways. The person who once seemed indifferent suddenly asks questions that reach too far. The one who claimed not to care reacts too strongly to something minor. The one who stayed silent now over-explains. These aren't personality changes. They're stress responses. When people are afraid of being seen for who they really are, their behavior becomes louder than their words. You might also notice something else. Stories don't line up anymore. Timelines feel off. Reactions come before information. People reference things you never shared. That's not intuition on their part. That's surveillance through proximity, through others, through attention paid when they thought you weren't looking. And here's where it gets especially revealing. People under pressure often test boundaries without realizing it. They drop hints. They make indirect comments. They joke about things that aren't jokes. They watch closely to see how you react. Not because they want a response, but because they want confirmation. Confirmation that you know, or that you don't. If you stay calm during these moments, it unsettles them more than confrontation ever would. Because calm suggests awareness without accusation. It suggests you see the pattern, but don't need to chase it. And that creates imbalance. They want you reactive, confused, seeking clarity. When you're steady, their internal narrative collapses. Another thing happens during this phase: comparison becomes obvious. They measure themselves against you out loud. They minimize your growth, then contradict themselves. They mention your past more than your present. That's not nostalgia. That's an attempt to anchor you to a version of yourself that feels safer to them. When they can't, frustration shows. You might catch glimpses of envy that weren't there before. Not obvious jealousy, but subtle irritation when you're praised. Discomfort when you're mentioned positively. Silence where support should be. These reactions aren't intentional. They're reflexive, and reflexes don't lie. This is also when people start revealing their motivations accidentally. They speak in "we" when they mean "I." They project intentions onto you that actually belong to them. They accuse you of distance while creating it. They imply change as if it's a flaw. These are defensive moves, not attacks, but shields cracking. You may feel a strange sense of déjà vu, like you're watching someone unravel a story you already outgrew. That's because you're no longer emotionally invested in maintaining illusions. When your identity stabilizes, you stop needing others to confirm it. And that removes the leverage people once had. What's important here is restraint. Not silence born of fear, but silence born of clarity. Let the slips happen. Let the contradictions stack. Let behavior speak. Truth reveals itself most cleanly when you don't interfere with it. There's also a shift in how others respond to your energy during this phase. Some pull away abruptly. Some try to reinsert themselves awkwardly. Some become overly complimentary. Some turn cold. These aren't calculated strategies. They're reactions to exposure. Everyone responds differently when they realize they've been seen. And yes, some people do realize it. They realize you're no longer unaware. Not because you said anything, but because awareness changes how you carry yourself. Your posture, your timing, your lack of urgency. It sends a message without words. I see more than you think. That realization is deeply destabilizing to someone who believed they were invisible, who believed their watching went unnoticed. Because now the power dynamic shifts. Observation loses its edge when it's no longer secret. This is often when guilt surfaces not as apology, but as awkward kindness, as unnecessary explanation, as sudden defensiveness. Guilt doesn't always want forgiveness. Sometimes it just wants relief. And relief comes from being acknowledged. But you don't owe that acknowledgement. Another subtle sign of exposure is repetition. They bring up the same topics again and again. They circle the same questions. They revisit moments long past. That's not interest. That's fixation. It's the mind trying to resolve something it can't let go of. You might also notice third-party involvement increase. Messages passed indirectly. Opinions shared through others. That's a classic pressure response. When direct confrontation feels too risky, people outsource clarity. They hope someone else will say what they can't, or tell them what to think. But here's the truth: no one can resolve their internal conflict for them. And no amount of watching will give them the answers they're seeking, because the answers aren't about you. They're about what your growth exposed in them. This is where many people make mistakes. They confront too early. They demand explanations. They reveal awareness prematurely. And in doing so, they allow the other person to remask, to rewrite the narrative, to regain control. You don't need to rush clarity. Clarity is already forming. Every slip is a piece. Every reaction is information. Every inconsistency is confirmation. And while all this is happening, you may feel oddly calm, grounded, less reactive than you used to be. That's growth. That's integration. That's what happens when you trust yourself enough to let truth arrive on its own timeline. You didn't set out to expose anyone. You didn't plan this shift. You simply became more aligned with yourself, and alignment has consequences. It rearranges dynamics. It dissolves pretense. It makes hidden things uncomfortable. The exposure phase isn't loud, but it's irreversible. Once someone starts showing you who they are under pressure, you can't unsee it. And once you see it, the relationship, whatever form it took, changes permanently. What comes next isn't confrontation. It's clarity through distance or honesty. Some will choose truth. Some will choose disappearance. Both are answers. And the watching. It won't stop immediately, but it will change. It will lose intensity. Because once the masks fail, curiosity fades. What remains is reality. And reality doesn't need to be monitored. Absolutely. Here's Section 4 reasons, fully original, natural, human, and approximately just 1,500 words, continuing from Section 3. This section moves from the exposure and cracks into Zindran's revelations, confessions, and the first moments where hidden truths become undeniable. 2. By this point, the energy surrounding you has shifted in ways most people can't even articulate. It's no longer subtle. The watchers, the observers, the ones who pretended indifference while secretly cataloging your every move, they're no longer operating in shadows. Their reactions are louder now, more visible. And the reason is simple. You've entered a space they cannot navigate. They're exposed because you've become unshakable, aware, and unbothered. They miscalculated. They assumed silence would shield them. They assumed your calm would keep their attention invisible. But here's the truth. They underestimated the way your presence naturally illuminates what was hidden. You might notice it in their speech patterns first. Small slips, phrases that don't line up with previous statements. Words that carry unintended weight. Jokes that aren't funny because they're not really jokes, they're tests, probes. Attempts to measure how much you've noticed. They're trying to gauge whether you're aware that something is shifting. And the more aware you are, the harder it becomes for them to maintain any semblance of control. What's fascinating is how people unconsciously confess without realizing it. It's subtle. They reveal their priorities by what they omit and what they emphasize. They disclose fear without naming it. They hint at admiration while disguising it as critique. And the moment they start revealing these truths, their own internal pressure escalates. The mask begins to warp because the energy it once contained no longer fits the reality of who you are now. Imagine a balloon being inflated slowly over time. That balloon represents tension, insecurity, unspoken observation. At first, it's manageable. People can maintain their composure. But eventually, it reaches a breaking point. Every interaction, every glance, every comment that once seemed casual is now amplified by the internal pressure building inside them. And when the balloon bursts, you're not just hearing the words. They come with a vibration, a resonance of all the hidden weight they carried. Now you may notice that the same people who acted indifferent are suddenly more erratic. Some overcompensate by becoming overly kind or eager to explain themselves. Others become cold or distant. Their behavior fluctuates because their internal equilibrium has been disrupted by your presence. And here's the critical insight: their reactions are no longer about you. They're about them. Every awkward comment, every overdone apology, every strange energy shift reflects their inability to reconcile your growth with their own self-perception. One of the first signs of real confession is repetition. They repeat topics, questions, or comments that seemed insignificant before. They circle back to moments or conversations, as if trying to find a pattern that doesn't exist. This is the mind under the weight of realization, trying desperately to understand what they can't control. And the intensity of this repetition is directly proportional to the impact your growth has had on them. The more they felt unsettled by you, the more they replay these moments to anchor themselves, hoping for clarity that only exists internally. Sometimes their confessions arrive through indirect channels. You may notice comments or messages that seem out of place. Someone mentions you in a conversation you weren't part of. Your name appears in a text or group discussion unexpectedly. These aren't coincidences, they're echoes of their internal tension leaking out. They're searching for validation or confirmation that others see what they see. And when the responses come back, admiration or acknowledgement, it destabilizes them further because it confirms what they feared. Your presence has significance, power, and influence they cannot ignore. What's essential for you in this phase is observation without reaction. You don't need to intervene or explain yourself. Let their words, gestures, and slips surface naturally. This is where clarity forms. Truth doesn't require you to chase it, it manifests in the behavior of those who cannot contain it. Your awareness acts as a mirror, reflecting their internal state without you needing to engage. And here's the beauty: the more you remain steady, the more their truth is revealed in its raw, unfiltered form. Another critical aspect of this phase is the realization that the person closest to you may have been the one watching the hardest. Not an enemy, not a stranger, but someone who had access to your life, someone you trusted. This is often the most challenging truth to digest, because familiarity amplifies impact. When someone close exhibits signs of obsession, fascination, or deep insecurity in response to your growth, it's unsettling. But it's also illuminating. Their attention, their analysis, their subtle manipulations, all of it points to recognition of your transformation and an inability to reconcile it with their own sense of self. At the same time, not everyone reacts in ways that are immediately obvious. Some will act neutral, even supportive, but their energy will carry tension. You'll feel it in the pauses of conversation, in the timing of their responses, in the faint hesitation before they speak. These micro signals are just as revealing as overt confessions. People cannot fully disguise energy. It leaks even when words do not, and your presence, steady and grounded, naturally exposes these leaks. As this phase progresses, you'll begin to notice alignment and misalignment more clearly. Who stays consistent? Who wavers? Who grows uncomfortable in ways that aren't logical, but are emotional? These patterns reveal the deeper truths about intention, loyalty, and the depth of observation. The cracks in behavior become maps, showing you where the true weight of your impact lies. Interestingly, exposure often forces people to confront themselves. They realize they misjudged your growth, underestimated your resilience, or failed to recognize your potential. That internal confrontation may come with guilt, fear, envy, or longing. And all of these emotions are signposts for you. They indicate where influence has landed, where perception has shifted, and where hidden admiration or obsession exists. Confession doesn't always arrive as a direct statement. Sometimes it comes as overcorrection. Someone who was distant suddenly becomes overly attentive. Someone who was dismissive overcompensates with praise or agreement. These behaviors aren't genuine attempts at connection. They're attempts at recalibration, trying to make sense of the dissonance your presence has created in their internal narrative. You may also observe the pull of curiosity in subtle ways. People ask questions indirectly, drop hints, or seek your opinion without revealing why. They check in on you in ways that feel procedural rather than relational. This is the hallmark of someone whose attention has become analytical, almost clinical, because they cannot understand the force they're observing. Your evolution has become a puzzle they feel compelled to study. During this period, you may feel a strange combination of tension and liberation. Tension, because the energy around you is unpredictable and intense. Liberation, because you no longer have to maintain illusions or engage with deception. Your clarity, your calm, and your alignment allow the truth to surface naturally, without manipulation. You don't need to push or prod. The reactions of others provide the confirmation. It's also essential to recognize patterns of projection. Those observing you often project insecurities, fears, and desires onto your actions. They interpret your detachment as disinterest, your growth as competition, your silence as challenge. Understanding that projection is at play allows you to separate their internal struggles from your reality. You remain untouchable because you are grounded in your own truth, while their responses reveal their relationship to you, not your worth. A critical insight in this phase is that observation and attention often reveal more than words could. What someone does in silence, the way they glance, hesitate, repeat, or redirect conversations, exposes priorities and feelings that might never be verbalized. Your ability to perceive these subtle cues without reacting impulsively turns observation into insight. You can map patterns, identify motives, and recognize the dynamics of influence without confrontation. Eventually, the pressure builds to a tipping point. People can only contain so much curiosity, admiration, fear, or envy. Once internal thresholds are crossed, behaviors that were controlled start to slip. Words come out too quickly. Emotions surface prematurely. Reactions become less calculated. And in those moments, the truth is undeniable. What was once hidden becomes visible. What was silent becomes audible. And what was carefully managed becomes transparent. This is where relationships recalibrate. Some connections will shift naturally. Some will dissolve quietly. Others will become raw, honest, and unfiltered. You may find yourself astonished by what emerges: confessions, admissions, unexpected vulnerability, or even the revelation of fascination that you never anticipated. These outcomes are not orchestrated. They are the inevitable consequence of your presence revealing hidden dynamics. During this period, it's common to encounter people who attempt to regain control. They may overcompensate, redirect, or attempt to rewrite narratives. But you will notice quickly control is an illusion once exposure has begun. The energy that was quietly observing can no longer maintain secrecy. Every slip, every reaction, every micro-expression becomes part of a pattern that cannot be ignored. And your awareness allows you to navigate this without being drawn into unnecessary conflict. It's also worth noting that this exposure phase is not about punishment or confrontation. It's about clarity. The universe has a way of highlighting what has been hidden, not to harm you, but to reveal truth about others, and about how your presence affects those around you. Their confusion, fascination, or unease is a reflection of your authenticity, not a reflection of deficiency. By the end of this stage, you'll notice a shift in the atmosphere. Silence no longer carries ambiguity. Tension no longer disguises itself. The energy is clearer, more defined. You can sense loyalties, insecurities, admiration, and hidden agendas. What was once a clouded space of uncertainty becomes a landscape of clarity. And in that clarity, you operate from a place of knowledge, not speculation. The final realization of this phase is profound. People cannot maintain secrecy when your presence triggers deep, unresolved responses. What they thought they could contain externally becomes visible because it cannot be contained internally. Their attempts to hide, distract, or manipulate unravel naturally. And the one thing that remains steady, consistent, and undeniable is you, your growth, your alignment, your calm, your clarity. This is the moment where everything begins to crystallize. You begin to understand the patterns, the motives, and the hidden dynamics. You see who has been honest in intention, who has been genuinely supportive, and who has been caught in fascination, envy, or insecurity. And this knowledge allows you to make choices from a place of clarity, rather than reaction. In this phase, the energy you carry becomes a measuring tool. People reveal themselves through their interaction with your presence. The inconsistencies, contradictions, and confessions become a mirror. You see who they are, not who they want you to believe they are. And this is empowering because it aligns your perception with reality. By the end of this stage, the watching has done its work. The observer, the analyst, the one who carried curiosity and tension in their chest. They've revealed their truth through behavior, not confession. Their energy, once hidden, is now evident. And in that revelation, you gain insight, understanding, and control over your environment, not by changing anyone, but by seeing them as they truly are. You've reached the point where the atmosphere around you is no longer ambiguous. It is charged with clarity. People's intentions, fears, and admiration are visible. The masks that once concealed motives are faltering. And through all of this, you remain steady, grounded, and unshaken. You've become the force that allows truth to surface without having to lift a finger. Now, everything that follows will be based on these revelations. Connections will realign naturally. People will respond according to who they truly are, not who they pretended to be. And you will move forward with the knowledge that your presence alone carries influence, clarity, and the power to expose what was once hidden. This is the turning point, the space where observation becomes understanding, tension becomes insight, and silence becomes undeniable truth. Perfect. Here's his Section 5 Drysen's fully original, natural, and 1500 words. This section moves from the revelations and cracks in Section 4 Drysen into as the climactic confessions, final truths being exposed, and the ultimate shift in energy around you. By now, the energy around you has transformed entirely. What was once subtle observation has become undeniable attention. The people who once pretended indifference are no longer capable of hiding the way your presence affects them. Masks that seemed secure have begun to crumble, and confessions that were once silent are on the verge of surfacing. This is the phase where everything that was concealed reaches its tipping point, and the truth becomes impossible to ignore. You may notice it first in the smallest details, the fleeting expressions, the pauses in conversation, the way someone's body language changes when your name comes up. These micro reactions are like cracks in a dam, signaling the inevitable flood. Every twitch, every shift in tone, every subtle glance reflects a mixture of awe, fear, curiosity, and admiration. People cannot contain the impact of your presence any longer, and that containment slipping is what makes this moment so powerful. Some people will attempt to regain control. They'll speak quickly, overcompensate with enthusiasm, or offer explanations that don't quite fit. Others will withdraw, creating distance as if removing themselves from your orbit might reduce the tension they feel. And yet, no strategy works. The more they try to control the narrative, the more exposed their truth becomes. Their internal reactions cannot be contained externally. What's fascinating is how instinct works during this phase. People respond not from thought, but from raw emotional awareness. Admiration surfaces, envy slips in, curiosity overtakes composure. You begin to see who operates from integrity and who reacts out of fear or insecurity. Every interaction becomes a reflection of their relationship to your energy, rather than your behavior. And the clearer you are within yourself, the more their responses reveal without you needing to act. At this point, one realization becomes unavoidable. The person who has been observing you most closely may be someone you once trusted implicitly. Someone whose presence felt safe, whose voice carried familiarity, whose attention once seemed supportive. But beneath that familiarity was a web of observation, analysis, and silent testing. Their intentions were not malicious, but their fascination with your growth and evolution was profound. They carried your image, your words, your actions to spaces you never entered, trying to understand a force they couldn't control. You might find this unsettling at first. It challenges your assumptions about loyalty, connection, and familiarity. But here's the truth: their actions were not about betrayal, they were about recognition. They understood, consciously or not, that your energy is rare, magnetic, and transformative. And because they couldn't fully grasp it, their attention became intense, analytical, and sometimes overwhelming. The confessions in this phase are rarely straightforward. They arrive in fragments, through words, glances, hesitations, or unexpected comments. Someone may casually drop a remark about you in conversation, only for the weight of it to land fully seconds later. Another person may attempt to redirect attention while simultaneously revealing more than they intended. And through these fragments, a narrative emerges that explains the strange tension, the shifting atmosphere, and the uncanny reactions you've sensed all along. There's a remarkable consistency in how people respond when confronted with the undeniable truth of your growth. They experience a collision of fear and admiration. They recognize something in you that they cannot replicate. They feel compelled to analyze, to study, to understand. And when they share their impressions, even subtly, it's not about controlling you. It's about processing the reality they can no longer deny. One of the most revealing dynamics is how people project their insecurities onto your progress. Your calm may feel like detachment. Your focus may seem aloof. Your growth may appear threatening. They interpret your alignment and strength as judgment, competition, or challenge. But the reality is simple: your presence exposes their own gaps, limitations, and unfulfilled potential. And that exposure triggers reactions they cannot contain. You may witness confessions that are almost instinctual. They slip out in the form of admiration disguised as critique, curiosity disguised as commentary, or awe hidden behind neutral statements. These indirect admissions are often more truthful than explicit words because they bypass conscious control. People reveal the weight of their observation without even realizing it. Their body language, tone, and timing speak volumes that words cannot contain. Some confessions arrive in moments of vulnerability. A smile that falters, a hesitation before speaking, a glance that lingers too long. These are micro-admissions that their internal world has been shaped by your presence. Even without a direct acknowledgement, their energy tells the story they have been watching, analyzing, and reacting to a force they cannot ignore. And in recognizing this, you gain clarity about the depth of your impact. Another critical aspect is repetition. People circle back to discussions about you, your actions, your presence, or your energy. They ask questions, share stories, and seek validation, sometimes without realizing that each repetition exposes their obsession or admiration. Repetition is a signal that their internal equilibrium has been disrupted. They are attempting to process and reconcile what they cannot control. Interestingly, the person who started the chain of observation, the one who first shared your image, sparked discussion, or initiated curiosity, will often be the first to experience internal pressure. Their energy shifts because they created a dynamic they could not anticipate. They are forced to confront the reality of your presence and the weight of their own fascination, fear, and admiration. And this confrontation often triggers the first explicit confessions. These confessions are not always verbal. They can manifest through actions, tone, and even absence. Someone may reach out unexpectedly, offer insight, or reveal knowledge about your impact in a way that clarifies their intentions. Others may withdraw, not out of disinterest, but because their internal tension has reached a threshold. Every response, whether overt or subtle, is a piece of the puzzle that illuminates hidden truths. One of the most striking elements of this phase is the emergence of honesty. People who once masked their reactions, who pretended indifference, or who concealed fascination, can no longer maintain the facade. Their energy gives them away. Their silence speaks. Their words, when they finally come, carry the weight of what they could no longer contain. And you, grounded in awareness, become the witness to the unveiling of truths that have been building over time. It's important to remember that their confessions are not a reflection of weakness in you. They are a reflection of recognition. They are an acknowledgement of the influence you carry, the energy you exude, and the transformation you have undergone. You are not responsible for their reactions, nor should you attempt to correct them. The value lies in witnessing, understanding, and maintaining your own alignment. In this stage, the dynamic shifts dramatically. People's energy no longer hides behind pretense. Masks crack, facades crumble, and the reality of your presence becomes unavoidable. Those who were once neutral or dismissive may suddenly reveal admiration, awe, or even envy. Those who were distant may become drawn in, compelled to respond in ways they never anticipated. And through all of this, the truth becomes clear: your presence is a catalyst for revelation. The tipping point often comes when confessions are unavoidable. Someone speaks words that confirm what you already sensed. A glance, a comment, a gesture, small but heavy with meaning, makes everything crystal clear. The atmosphere, once ambiguous, now carries the weight of unspoken truths, making it impossible to ignore the depth of observation and fascination directed toward you. During this time, you may notice a shift in the way energy moves around you. The people who observed most closely are no longer merely passive watchers. Their behavior, intentionally or not, communicates acknowledgement. They respond, react, and engage in ways that make their admiration, fear, or fascination evident. The tension is no longer hidden, it is visible, tangible, and undeniable. One of the most profound insights in this phase is understanding that influence does not require effort. Your calm, aligned, unbothered state generates reactions without intervention. You do not need to impress, explain, or prove yourself. The mere fact of your presence is enough to disrupt patterns, reveal truths, and compel confessions. This is the hallmark of energy that cannot be contained. Another element is the clarity of pattern recognition. By this stage, you can identify the ways people have reacted over time. The subtle shifts in behavior and the indirect confessions that have been accumulating. You see the alignment between observation and reaction, understanding who truly values you, who has been caught in fascination, and who cannot reconcile your growth with their own limitations. The person who initiated the chain of attention, the one who first watched most closely, is now at a pivotal point. Their internal pressure has reached a critical mass, and their confession, direct or indirect, will redefine your understanding of their role in your life. This moment is not about confrontation or revenge. It is about truth emerging naturally, unfiltered and undeniable. In the end, this phase culminates in clarity. The observers, the silent analyzers, the ones who pretended indifference, all reveal their true energy. Admiration, envy, fascination, insecurity, they all become visible. And through this exposure, you gain insight, understanding, and alignment. You no longer need to guess. You see the truth in their reactions and can operate from knowledge rather than speculation. By the conclusion of this stage, the environment has shifted completely. The atmosphere is clear, intentions are visible, and reactions can be understood in their full context. You carry the awareness of who is aligned with you, who is fascinated, and who cannot contain your presence. This understanding equips you to move forward with confidence, clarity, and unshakable alignment. The ultimate lesson of this phase is simple: your presence carries weight. People notice, analyze, and react, whether openly or in secret. Their confessions, slips, and reactions are a testament to the impact you have on the world around you. And by witnessing these dynamics, you understand the depth of your influence and the authenticity of your growth. This is the space where transformation is confirmed, not just in yourself, but in the people around you. Their reactions, once hidden, now reveal patterns, truths, and intentions that were impossible to ignore. And through this, you realize the extraordinary truth: your energy, your alignment, and your calm are not just personal assets. They are forces that expose truth, reveal character, and illuminate the hidden dynamics of any environment you enter. You have reached a place where observation has turned into clarity, where hidden fascination becomes undeniable acknowledgement, where silence gives way to confession. And in this space, you no longer react, you witness. You no longer speculate, you understand. And through this, you step fully into the power of your presence, aware of the truths you carry, the impact you have, and the revelations that unfold naturally around you.